Hello, and welcome to Broadcast Astrology Insight for Humans. And welcome to our first podcast that isn't the lunar return, the predictive charts that we do each month with the new moon. This podcast, we're featuring Regina, Marlina, and myself and Sara, and we're all here to talk about astrocartography. And this is something that we've all been playing with for some time and working with clients and that sort of thing. And we're really excited to just explore the ways that it can be used and how it's just a really simple, insightful tool, which I will let Sara introduce.
So, astrocartography, otherwise known as ACG, is a modern astrological technique where we plot the natal planets basically as lines on a map of the world in order to see where the planetary influences are most active. So, you're essentially comparing the natal chart with a map of the world. And ideally, I think in our professional practices, we all do that in conjunction with an exploration of the natal chart, which is basically looking at your particular orientation to life, your field of experience that's inherent in your natal story. But today is really just looking at that, how powerful astrocartography can be as a standalone tool to help you understand the effect of where you live and how it pulls forth some of those energetics from the natal chart. It opens up a lot of potential in terms of being strategic about where you live, where you work, or travel, and it can help you understand some of the gifts and challenges inherent in the place you're living. So, we're going to be exploring a lot of charts today, some from our own lives and some from our practices. And then at the end, we're going to pull up sort of a chart for all of us to take a look at together and share just real time thoughts and insights for a chart that I've brought to the table. So, diving in, shall we start with Marlina?
Yeah,
Uh,
so let me put up your chart up here, Marlina.
Thank
And yeah, so I am going to share the desktop. There we go. All right.
All right. So,
So take it away.
just a little background on this person. Hello. Thank you for having me. This person relocated. This person's originally from Queens, New York, and relocated for 4 years with her spouse, who is in the military, to Olympia, Washington. And during that time, she experienced quite a bit of growth. She moved to a place that kind of puts Jupiter angular in her chart. Jupiter in her natal chart is actually the ruler of her sixth house. It's a very interesting dynamic because Jupiter usually is a place where you move along to increase maybe expansion of knowledge, exploration of the world and travel and growth in general. And she did experience quite a bit of increase in travel because she hated Olympia so much. So she ended up actually scheduling the most flights she's ever had and cross country trips that she's ever had in her life during her 4 year stint there. Also, all the it being the ruler of her sixth house, she did experience quite a bit of illness in the first period, the first year of her being there. She experienced quite a bit of asthma from the new pollen and I believe it's like the air quality at certain points over there was very difficult for her. It also happens to be, Jupiter happens to be her L10, her ruler of her 10th house. And she actually held the job that she's had spent the longest time in during her time there. So she was able to become a driver for the military on the base during the time that her spouse was located over there. And she was driving quite a bit. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, just checking my notes real quick, she also had North Node in her 10th house while there. So it was angular. And it was a time where described it as being so interesting to meet so many different people from all around the world, but also experiencing a deep loss of home and family connection. And as you can see, the South Node is located in the the fourth house of her chart in this location. She also experienced quite a bit of relationship situations going on because she felt a bit of resentment having to relocate away from her family, even though she spent the most time with her partner, considering that he's a military spouse. He's traveled quite a bit during their marriage. And this was the period of time where they spent the closest proximity to each other for an extended period of time. But she still experienced quite a bit of isolation and difficulty. And that's basically where we are with this chart. It was very interesting to see how Jupiter worked for her. She also, during this time, just a side note, she entered a veterinarian training program. So she actually experienced some higher education, travel, and growth of faith in herself as well, realizing that she could make it on her own without her family and without being very close to them. So with that, we'll move on to the next case.
I'm
Does
wondering,
anybody
Marlina, did
Yeah.
the Jupiter, were any of her health problems related to excess? Because it sounds too like with all the travel and the work.
Yes, it was excess. It was also excess stress. I find sixth house ruler, she felt extremely stressed being on her own, having no friends or family around. And I think that increased her permeability, if you will, to sickness at this time.
Yeah, and I always think about Michael telling us about the sixth house being the house of slavery, and it conjures up that image of all of the work that we do that we're not seen in, that we're not acknowledged for. And since that's her natal placement, I've been curious about that, like how the planet speaks in the natal chart and how that might show up in the particular location.
It's interesting that you say that because for the first year, remember she's there for 4 years. She didn't get the job right away. In the beginning, she was like a housewife, if you will. And that really got to her because she was like, here I am stuck at home with no friends, no family in a new place I don't expect to be in. And it gave her that sense of I'm a slave to the house. I'm serving my husband. And that's not in any way her personality or her wish.
I think that speaks really nicely to the South Node in the fourth house, like where it's a place of decrease. It's a place where it's draining her. And interesting that the focus was a lot on work, and her longest standing job was towards that North Node in Pisces. That's really interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. And that the focus here as well is this Venus descendant.
Right.
And we have it conjunct Pluto, which is clearly a story in her life for sure. And I wonder, just relationships clearly are being explored, and who she is in relationship and who she is in relationship in the context of a family, in the context of having the sixth house, her natal sixth house ruler conjunct the ascendant, like her feeling like she's a subservient to her environment, and also how does that relate to her relationships as well, because it's a tricky relationship signature to have in a chart in the first place, and it looks like this is probably living here brought those things up for her in a way that was probably challenging, I would guess, but also likely just helped her to, hopefully, I guess I'm being optimistic, hopefully helped her to understand it in a deeper way, right?
Yeah. I think that for sure they lost, Pluto takes, right, and doesn't give back.
Yeah.
I think in a very interesting way, they experienced quite a bit of transformation in their relationship that
Yeah.
have not returned to. They are not the same couple when they're as now. It's definitely for the better, but
Mhm.
it's that Plutonian passageway.
And it would
Definitely.
seem like it would be a difficult integration time. I was looking at her natal chart and noticed that her Venus and Pluto were angular anyway, but they're still in detriment, and now they're moving to a different angular house. So I would imagine the integration would hurt before it gets better. Whereas I remember I actually did a client who had Venus Pluto, and I asked how that was going for her. She met her love there. And yes, it's transformational, but they were just extremely bonded, and the integration was a little bit smoother for her.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely a lot of transformation. And it's in just having it on the descendant too is just taking that Venus and amplifying it as far as its role as working with relationships. So,
Yes.
yeah.
I think it highlights the power dynamic between couples, especially
Mhm.
when we speak about relocation and relocation as a couple.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, we're relocating not necessarily for both people, but for one part of that partnership. And so
Yeah.
that creates definitely an interesting dynamic as well.
Yeah, and you can see how that looks. It looks like that was very highlighted, and it looks like it was a very prominent transformational, journey for her and her partner to go through. All right, so let's bring up does anybody else have anything out they wanna say about that one?
I just think you definitely always have to look at the natal chart because on its face, the
Sure.
Jupiter ascendant and Venus descendant look beautiful and wonderful and like it's smooth sailing. But in reality, with all the details of her chart, it's a growth opportunity, but can be extremely difficult to get through. So I think that was helpful as
Absolutely.
an exercise.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay,
Okay.
and this one takes us to so I'm gonna zoom out here. Oops.
So this is, I'll just give it a little background while we orient
Yeah.
ourselves in that. This was a much more short trip, but a little extended. It was a 3-week stint to Niger for her educational program. She was doing a public health master's and went to study fistulas in women in Niger. And she ended up moving to that location, brought out an angular Neptune in the fourth house. And this for her definitely was a trip that was also the sun and Uranus were in the fourth house as well during this trip. And she experienced quite a bit of disappointment, shocking twists and turns to trips and journeys throughout that time there. And we can focus in on Niger and particularly that southeast. You see that little city to the bottom left of Niger?
Oh,
Yeah.
there it is. Okay, I see it.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
So during her time there, another person in her group offered to help the group travel to Ghana because she lived in Ghana previously. And she's, oh, don't worry, it's going to be great. You're going to have a great experience. And the trip was nonstop shocking events. They didn't change money, so they didn't have the currency as they traveled. They found out that they needed a visa to go where they were trying to go, and they did not have that. They ended up having a broke down bus and were essentially homeless for 4 days with no money to really purchase food, accommodations, anything. They were 4 young women that were from the various parts of the United States that were alone in this area. And so it was a very big time of struggle for her. She found it to be transformational in terms of her perspective on the world. But at the same time, it definitely made her experience the limits, if you will, or the boundaries of herself. Like she learned quite a bit about herself, testing of her own interest in participating in community. And she also just learned about the deep thirst that she had to help the health of women, of others during this time. And so that was definitely an interesting trip for her. Natally, her Uranus is in the sixth house. Although she didn't experience illness, she was there for public health studies. And she also has her Neptune natally in the seventh house. And it was very interesting that one of the things that she highlighted here was her relationships with these other people that she traveled with being a focus during this trip, and as well as her relationships with others in terms of service, medically, in terms of health and illness, particularly the fact that fistulas are such a really difficult thing to witness, and that it really left, what in her own words, a mark on her in terms of viewing women's health and the importance of that globally. Does anyone have?
This is an off comment, but I once Googled fistula because my cousin who's doing her residency told me she was working on them. And those are very difficult things to work on
Right.
and very painful. So
Yeah.
that's pretty amazing that your friend was doing research there. One thing I noticed is that Jupiter is getting into the sixth in this like relocated chart. So all of those lessons that she learned in regard to public health and that passion and like how it like, I guess, infused within her own belief system and how she moves forward now in the world. I thought that was pretty interesting that I was looking at that.
I also thought natally, her son is the ruler of her third house. And this really
Right.
brought out that aspect of understanding community and her place in it, her desire to care for her community.
The other thing I noticed, you were talking about her, what came up a lot were her relationships with these people or the people that she met in that location. As far as I know, and it might be too far, but I see the Pluto nodes per end as well. I'm not sure if it's something that would be covered in Naimi, but it's usually I only use a 1 degree
Or
orb.
so one of the things that it became, and again, we just brought this up with Pluto taking things and not returning them. The girls that traveled, the women that traveled together, ended up creating the difficulties of the trip created a very difficult dynamic for the one who offered to take them to the trip. So originally they were a group of friends, and by the end of it, that had been lost. There was a sense of disappointment, of loss of trust. The person who had offered to travel and guide them became overwhelmed with the responsibility and the unexpected turbulence of the trip and abandoned them a little bit,
Wow.
the other girls a little bit. And so they felt really resentful. It felt very difficult. And it wasn't necessarily a relationship that was repaired after that.
That is so interesting. Yeah. So that definitely tracks with,
Yeah.
with the Pluto nodes. That's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
When I look at this, I think this is a great example for why it can be really helpful to look at an astrocartography chart before you travel. Because when you have an Chiron, MC is perfect. She's going there to heal people. She's going there to help people, work with people who are sick. It's beautiful. But the on the ground experience is going to be extremely disruptive. And if she could have had that foresight before she went, that could have been really helpful, where she could have just tampered and had a realistic expectations of what's coming about. My husband just did work um, in Panama, which is along his Uranus line. And he went through the whole gamut of being excited about being there and working there to the project just suddenly becoming a total disaster. And now it's just completely, it was so Uranian. I was like, oh, yeah, there it is. Like he was so inspired. And then now it was too much. It was just constant chaos. And so it was just, it was nice to have that insight. And I think that for this individual, it might have been nice to have that insight as well of this. It could definitely be the way that this unfolds. And yeah, for sure.
And I do want to point out that the Uranian note to this gave, I feel like, that impetus to want to do something out of the norm and go somewhere. But along with that, you have to be ready for the ride, right?
Totally. And having that information up front, yes, you're going to have your mind open. You're going to understand different parts of yourself and different parts of your life purpose. It's a great place to just get shaken outside of your comfort zone so that you can experience life in a different way. But the process might not always be comfortable.
Right.
Buckle in.
I'm also curious how else this came out for her. So I see the sun line there, and I know you said that she learned so much about herself and how she wants to continue helping people moving forward. But I wonder if while she was there was a bit of attention on her to just take leadership towards anything. I'm just curious how her.
Naturally, she is a leader.
Oh, nice.
But from the discussion we had about the location, it didn't necessarily it seemed like she was trying to more go with the flow than take. Obviously, she's not going to lead anyone to Ghana if she's never been there. And also, even among the health studies there, it's not necessarily like she was a student, so she wasn't necessarily able to take lead there. So it's an interesting way to see a person who's naturally very type A, if you will, very ship oriented to go with the flow and then experience such quite a ride.
Awesome. Sarah, do you have anything you want to say?
Oh, I've been trying to follow because I can't see anything, but I'm on my
Oh,
I got on my bigger screen here.
okay, good. Yeah, for some reason, hopefully this and the recording, this turns out more clear. But we had a discussion about how to present this map, and it's not as easy, it's not as clear as we would like. All right, so let's go to let's bring up, we'll do my natal chart real quick, and I'll give you guys my experience with that. And let's see, we'll go over here. So the thing that I wanted to look at is people are always interested in where to meet, romance, love, that sort of thing. And you guys can see here, this is my Venus descendant line. And somewhere around here is Salt Lake City. So I'm just going to put the clicker here. And you can see for me, this is where I met my husband, basically. So yeah, that's it. Astrology works. Astrocartography is a great tool. And I actually just realized this not too long ago, because of course we always look at everybody else's charts, but we rarely look at our own. So there's that where I landed. I was working in Salt Lake City on a project and met my husband, and we've been married for over 10 years now. So there's that. A lot of other stuff happened there as well, just meeting important women, friends, that sort of thing. And
Can
then
I ask about, Lisa, your health, just because it moves the Neptune so much closer to the angle?
you know what? So I lived in Salt Lake City several times. And there was a time when I lived in Salt Lake City where it was like this moment of solitude for me. And that makes it a little bit different. But yeah, I think that Neptune there is me going inward. And for this, and the first time I've lived there 3 times for different projects. And the first time I was partying the whole time. This, this second time it was a time of solitude and going inwards and just doing yoga constantly. And then the third time I met my husband. Yeah.
Really cool.
Yeah. And then Jupiter's up here too, which is nice. And yeah, I've always enjoyed living in Salt Lake City for sure. So
Yeah,
there's a lot going on for me there.
I was curious about how your career was. I know you were saying that you were meeting a lot of wonderful women, which is very Venus descendant as well, but how your career was going, how that project went, because you do have Jupiter very close to the angle, very close to your MC there, but it's in detriment. So I'm curious if there's any integration that needed to happen. Am I looking at that right?
My background is in archaeology, and I had my first archaeology job out there. So that really started off my career in archaeology, which I continued with for another decade and ended up getting my master's in. So, and then the second time I was there was starting my yoga career, because that was right before I went to training. And then the third time I was there was when I finally learned how to actually make money. And I support myself because, surprise, archaeologists and yoga instructors don't make a lot of money. So I finally figured out the third time I was finally figuring out how to support myself and be abundant in my life.
Awesome.
Yeah. So all of that. Anything else? Okay. I always feel awkward talking about myself. So sorry if I'm like, okay. All right. So let's go out here. We'll move over to Denver, which is where I currently live. Is that Denver? Where's Colorado? All these boxes. I think this is it. Sorry for in Denver. Well, I figured this out. In Denver, there we go. It brings, you can see it's right on my Jupiter MC line right over here. And similar to the chart that you were talking about before, Marlina, Jupiter rules my natal 6th house. And I have definitely had most prominent health issues that I've ever had living here. That's been the most challenging part of living on my Jupiter line, for sure. Sorry. And but the good thing is that, and for some reason this thing isn't working. But the good thing is that I've also been involved in education to a degree that I never have before. And yeah, just really figured out what I really want to do with my career. And I've basically been in some sort of certification or training or whatever, basically since I set foot in Colorado. So that's pretty much been my Colorado experience.
What is that Puran? Is it Uranus Mercury or Uranus Pluto?
Uranus,
It's
Pluto.
Uranus Pluto. And actually, I have lived my entire life, I've lived within 200 miles of this Uranus Pluto line.
Whoa.
Hmm. Yeah. So it's always been pretty prominent wherever I've lived.
How has that worked out for you? Because a lot of the descriptions can say that you can be someone who is a leader, right? But in a way that's not obviously mainstream. But it also
Mhm.
could that you have an awareness of kind of the underbelly of society and you work towards revolutionary change in that regard. So have you felt that at all? Does it feel true for you? How is it manifested for you?
Yeah, I feel like I've definitely always been interested in the underbelly of everything. And I think, yeah, just being interested in both the ancient underbelly as well as the psychological underbelly and just
Literally an
feeling.
archaeologist. I just
Yeah. Yes. So any way that I can get underneath what is actually happening in this experience called life, I've always been very interested in that ever since I could remember.
Have you experienced an increase in travel along this?
I wouldn't say so. I don't think that's been part of it because that Jupiter, as well as ruling my 6th house natally, also rules my 3rd house.
Mm. But you have felt like you've expanded in community then, at least
Absolutely.
education, right? Yeah, yeah.
For sure. Yeah, the educational part has definitely expanded my community. That's why I'm here with you guys today.
Hello.
So that's my example there. And okay, so let's move forward to Sarah's, just because we're these are taking, which is great, just the breadth of everything. But I want to make sure that we have time to also get to this line chart as well. And Sarah, where about is Grand Junction? Is it like
it's still alive.
Yeah, just about.
right here-ish?
Sure.
Okay. Does that look about right? This is first person.
Oh, that's my first person.
Yeah. So this is
So this one I just wanted to mention really briefly because she came out here on a whim to Colorado and was here for a short time, but during that time she met her life partner. And I can't even see what are the
yeah,
lines? They're
the
the
lines here
Jupiter
is Jupiter
descendant.
descendant and North Node IC.
So she came out here with her mother too, and this kind of random trip, lived out here for this stint, met the man, and then she and the man returned to the place where she grew up and lives now. But I just thought it was interesting, actually, because the Purans caught my eye.
Yeah, the moon Uranus.
The moon Uranus, she took this gamble with her mom, and this risk came down. And then also
The sun node,
the
where she met
sun node.
where she met her
Yes.
husband. Yeah.
Yeah. So intimate
Beautiful.
connection with the man. She meets the
Yeah.
man and takes him away.
It's just so interesting that there's so many ways that these relationships manifesting can work, right? And that the one that we looked at for me, it was like very literal Venus descendant. But then here we get the Jupiter descendant. And when you look at the chart, Venus is actually pretty close to the ascendant, as well as the Piran influence as well.
Yeah. And natally, she has Chiron in the 7th house. She came out here, it kicked Chiron out of the 7th, put the benefic Jupiter there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
I would be interested to know if when this happened, how her perspectives on relationships were prior to this encounter with this man that then became her spouse. If it felt like a healing experience for her, or if it felt she was just like moving forward in a way that she had not experienced prior.
I think that's it. I think it was something new.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Really nice. Anything else? Okay. Let's put up Sarah's chart.
I'll make this quick too. I just think it's so fascinating to look at these locational charts. But so I live west of the Mars descendant here. And I spent some time in Santa Fe too, which just put me closer to it. And I basically spent the bulk of my life growing up in this town. And I've started multiple businesses here. I've been pretty much able to move out into the community and do whatever it is I want to do. I always feel like it's accessible to me here in this place. But I've lived other places for stints of time, the most significant of which was up in Seattle. I moved up there for my master's degree. And I was sick the whole time I was there. I literally felt sick the minute I landed in the city, and I was miraculously healed when I drove out of that city 4 years later.
Wow.
And there are a couple things there. There's the influence of Mercury. I went up there for the degree, but then it also, the Purans, I was right up next to, where are we? Let me orientate myself. So yeah, Saturn. I was on Saturn node. And then it's getting far, but like even the Saturn Chiron down there, and I was working on an acupuncture degree, so
I would be
using
interested
realm
to
of-
know if with that Saturn node you met a mentor at all in that, or you connected with someone
I
who
actually felt really orphaned because I'm so used to being in community. And then I was like flopped down into the middle of like downtown city living, and my husband left every Sunday night and came home Friday night. He worked out of town the whole time I lived up there. And so initially it took some time to build relationship. And when I left there, I left with a couple of dear friends that I'll have for the rest of my life. It's very Saturn node, but it took a long
Mhm.
time to get there. And initially it really felt lonely. Yeah.
It looks like a
Um,
lonely place for you. It looks like some place where you want to make connections, but with all of the Puran's influence, it looks like there's just a lot of closed doors or restriction or limitations on how you interact with others and are able to.
It's like the whole little fish in a big pond, I think is a very Saturn
Mhm.
node kind of thing.
Interesting. That's a great insight for sure.
but I
Do you-
do right.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I do the idea that Saturn both gives and takes in that sense, and that you worked really hard and you were able to cultivate a community that ended up being lifelong for you, like of friendships that were.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really the saying Saturn does not deny delays. And so with your hard work and consistency, you eventually did build that community of long lasting relationships. They were not superficial in any sense.
And Regina, I think we were talking about this because we have dignified Mars in our chart, that we have to look at the whole breadth of potentials with these planets. And even whether they're benefic or malefic or what have you, they all have their gifts and challenges and ways to be worked with.
I am curious how you felt on the Saturn the Mars Saturn paran. I'm always interested on how someone's experience is there. Was it close enough for you to feel it?
I think there,
Part of the sickness?
yeah, and just on some level, depression that the Saturn was just bearing down. And I think environmentally, I grew up in the high desert. And so just being in that environment was so hard, but it definitely put a lid on things, on my like natural martial energy.
Makes total sense. Thank you.
Yeah. And I have so much more I would like to say about you living in Grand Junction too. Like that your moon Chiron on your ascendant, and you heal people, especially women, in their fertility.
Yes. And so this client that we're actually pulling up now,
Yeah.
this chart, is somebody that I met because she came to me for treatment for infertility. And this was a long time ago. I don't know, 17, 16 years ago. So I really haven't thought about this case deeply until I just pulled up this chart yesterday. And I was like, oh, wait till you see. You know, Moon Pluto.
Yeah.
Look how close it is to Grand Junction.
Really close.
And she was obsessed with having a child. And she was diagnosed with MS fairly early on. I think she was maybe 22 when she was diagnosed. And a lot of people want partnership. They fixate on the partner. She fixated on the child. Even before the partner was an issue, she did some artificial insemination, several rounds, and then she eventually met a partner who also wanted to have kids. And so that's how I came into the story in her life. And she wrote a memoir about her story. And so she's very much open to sharing her life. But when I saw this Moon Pluto, I was like, of course, the obsession and the drive and to be a mother, and also the empowerment and the taking it into her own hands too, like the willingness to, as somebody living with a chronic degenerative disease, to embark on that journey by herself, like the willingness, the bravery. And I think that's something with Pluto too. It can take us into such, like, where we're really willing to confront our fears.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I was going to say, you mentioned that Moon Pluto as a focus on the child. And I think it's so interesting because I immediately was like, focus on being a mother.
Yes, yeah.
Like that Moon Pluto is mother.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Her mother, but I mean, her desire to be mother to mother.
Be a mother.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's interesting how close it is to, not necessarily that close, but it is somewhat conjunct the South Node in her second house. And just that probably journey of evaluating her own self-worth and evaluating like what she is, what she has, what she wants, as like a modern depiction of a second house theme kind of being highlighted there. And I think I was looking at her natal chart at one point, and she's already a Moon Pluto person. And so living then on a line that will magnify that even more, I'm really curious how that just expanded things for her.
Is that her 27 Libra in the third house?
Jupiter?
In this chart. I'm just wondering if the ruler of her fifth house cusp is Jupiter. So it'd be interesting to see in terms of talking about fertility challenges and the questions of the womb, how this emphasized the placement of her Jupiter.
Yeah, with this Jupiter Pluto Paran.
Yeah. But also though, it's interesting because in this chart, with her relocated chart, Jupiter is in the third house and she has to reach out to others in order to get help for herself. And also a lot of people learn very quickly that fertility journeys are about self-education as well. So this is like about her learning about her body, about her health, about how to create, like you said, that power over and autonomy over the self, and balancing that with that Jupiter Pluto, that like intrinsic faith in what will be, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting.
And the line that is being really highlighted here is the Saturn MC. So like who she is in the world, her identity, uh, feeling like she's got a to-do list, like she's got hard deadlines. And that in this case, I think especially with the moon Pluto there emphasizes that it has to do with potentially with the obsession, with the desire, with the drive to become a mother and the steps that she has to take. And also, I'm guessing that this journey that she took was like really matured her quite a bit and helped to form who she now is. And I think sometimes people are drawn to different locations because they're looking that some part of them is looking for a certain experience, and that might have been part of what she was doing in Grand Junction. And it- besides the moon Pluto was how part of being a mother is also being mature and stepping into who I am uh, in a as a more authoritative figure and being ready to take the hard steps that it's required to get to where she wanted to go.
Yeah. And I see that Mars in the seventh house and Mars
Mhm.
descendant line, not too
Yeah,
far.
not too
for
far.
her.
Yeah.
But it just made me think, Sarah, how you were saying that she took initiative, she was taking action, she was moving things forward. I am curious, obviously, if she was the more dominant one doing this in her relationship, taking that forward momentum action towards what she wants. So I feel like it just correlates really nicely with the moon Pluto, but also with that angular Mars in the seventh, her relationship.
Yeah, so hold that because this is the place where she met her husband, where she birthed her two sons, and then she moved to San Diego, which is where she still resides now. And yeah, I would love your thoughts on. I thought when I first pulled this up, I looked at that Mercury Uranus, and because she has MS, I was a little like, oh, Mercury Uranus can speak to instability in the nervous system. But her career has taken a turn too, like being close to LA, where she's definitely interested in, she's published books out in California. That's where her writing career has really taken off. She's looking right now for an agent because she wants to write shows and movies. I think more like TV series based type shows. And so, yeah, knowing the piece about the MS and the nervous system, what would be your thoughts about this location?
I think it's interesting that you mentioned the Mercury because natally her Mercury is L3. And you said she published, her career's taking off. She's got, that's also her L3 and L11, L2, L3, L11. So Mercury Uranus being, in this case, at least beneficial to her long-term dreams and wishes, to like big things happening for her, money and publishing wise, is a very interesting highlighted dynamic there for her.
Mhm.
But I don't know much about the Mercury Uranus health wise.
It's hard on the nervous system is essentially it's of Mercury's the all of the nerves and the mental pathways. It can also be anxiety. It can be inspiring, but it can also lead to basically
Overwhelmed.
any sort of like mental or energetic burnout where there's just too much too fast happening.
And then with the Sun Mars for Ron too, I think that does not support that picture. And at the same time, we get this angular Jupiter, I think that's facilitated some of the opportunity out there.
Yeah. Jupiter I see is like my favorite line as long as it's not hurting anything else in the chart. So I just was immediately drawn to that because it's just my favorite. I just love it. With abundance to your home. It's one of the best lines to live on. Again, if you don't have the planet in detriment or in a house that is hidden natally, but I think that's the added benefit. I have only good things to say about it in her chart in particular, but yeah, it makes me question because I personally live on a Sun Mars Paran now, and I can't sit down. Like and I have these moments of just like burnout, and I don't necessarily have as severe of a condition, right? So I am curious how that pans out for her and her daily living, and if she's taking those moments to retreat a bit, because she does have a lot of like frenetic energy going through where she's living now.
Yeah, she needs to spend some time on the beach.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Take the drive through traffic, go stick your feet in the sand.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes when we're looking at these charts, we were talking about touching on before is that there's caution to certain areas where Sun Mars can be really great and motivating and fiery, and you can get a lot done in her condition. And also because there's Mercury Uranus close, uh, and then Jupiter there. Jupiter's usually good. In this combination, it could just give you too much too fast all the time.
Yep.
Like the water faucet is just on full at its highest point, and she's like drowning in
Right.
all of everything that life's giving her in this location. So definitely I would be advising her to reel in the Saturn that's at the top of her chart as well, to help create good boundaries and help to be a good authority for what's good for her and what's not good for her. And as far as everything that's coming in and all of the demands that are being given to her in this place, is just really using that Saturn, I would say.
Mhm.
Anything else? All right. We had a lot more charts to go through as well. And it was so fun to go, but we are over an hour at this point. So we're not trying to go too far into everything at this point. So this has been really great. And I think that as far as the audience goes, I know that there's a lot of jargon that we were using. I know we were all really trying to reel it in, and there's a lot of stuff that might be over your heads. But I think that, and for the astrologers listening, I hope that this was an enjoyable journey for you. I just hope it was enjoyable for everybody. Astrocartography is one of those tools that is easy to roll into a session. I know that for myself personally, it's something where I can easily do like a natal chart session or solar return and just do a 30-minute add-on for it with the solar and do the astrocartography, something like that. And I'm sure everybody has their own structure as far as how we do our consultations and that sort of thing. But it's a tool that can be really useful just to understand what energetic you're living along and where some of these energies and challenges or blessings that you're living with are coming from. So I hope that this was a useful journey for everybody to see how that can manifest in a lot of different ways. So,
I
Yeah.
appreciate you mentioning that, Lisa, because it was a little bit behind the scenes. Like, this is how astrologers work. But it was not exactly made for the layperson's consumption, but it
mhm,
gives you a little window into how we think and how we work. And hopefully it's something of interest. And yeah, it's an easy thing to look at and it gives a lot of information.
absolutely.
Thank you,
So
Regina and Marlena, for joining us
yeah,
today.
Thank you
thank
for
you.
having us. This was so fun. Thank you
Awesome.
for
Yeah.
having
And
us.
I will put everybody's contact info if you want to get a consultation by either Regina or Marlena. The information will be there, and or follow their work. I think that you guys are both on social media. So at least Instagram, I believe. So yeah, follow, and there's a lot of good stuff. A lot of us are just jumping into our astrology career at this point. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we'll see you next time.
Good
Bye.
Take care, everybody. Bye.